At Lake Trasimene, on a single morning, a Roman army marched into weather, into ground, and into another man's intention, and it could not tell the three apart until all three had closed around it. The road ran along the northern shore, the water on one side and the hills rising on the other. In clear light, a commander might have read the danger in the shape of the place, for the shape of the place was the danger, but there was no clear light that morning. The mist lay on the lake, and the lake narrowed the road, and the slopes kept their men hidden, and sight grew so short that the army ceased to be an army and became a column of fragments, each fragment hearing more than it could see. Hannibal had chosen the ground long before the Romans reached it. His army had moved along the route with the Romans close behind, and then, in the night, it had turned back upon its own road and climbed into the hills above it. Campfires burned at the far end of the lake, and the fires said what fires say to a pursuing army: the enemy is ahead of you, resting, still within reach if you press on. The Romans entered the lake road before dawn with pursuit in their minds. They believed the enemy lay in front of them. The enemy they were chasing had already been set around them like a closing hand. When the blow fell, it fell from the slopes, from the flank, from the rear, and out of the fog itself. Men near the front did not know what had happened behind them. Men at the rear could not see the front. The road that had promised pursuit became the floor of an ambush, with the lake barring every way out as the hills gave up their hidden men. There died Flaminius the consul, and thousands of Romans and allies were killed or taken around him. Trasimene was not simply another defeat after Trebia, it was a defeat of a new kind. At Trebia, Hannibal had drawn a Roman army across a winter river into the battle he wanted. At Trasimene, he marched a Roman army into a battlefield it did not know existed. After Trasimene, Rome had to sit with a question it hated. What if answering Hannibal quickly was the very thing Hannibal wanted most? After Trebia, Rome made a reasonable plan, and the plan deserves to be called reasonable even though it failed. Winter slowed the armies, and across the road south stood the Apennines, the long mountain spine of Italy, old beyond the memory of any people then living on either side of them. No invader could simply ignore those mountains. The Senate set new consular armies upon the likely ways through, one force under Cneius Servilius Geminus toward Ariminum on the Adriatic side, and Gaius Flaminius on the western side, near Arretium in Etruria. The design assumed that Hannibal must take one of the main roads south, and that the two Roman armies would join upon him once his direction showed itself. The plan shows Rome learning. This time the Senate did not throw one army into Hannibal's path and trust courage to mend whatever courage had broken before. It used geography, the placement of the consuls, and the mountains themselves as a warning system. Neither consul was meant to fight alone. The two armies were to converge when the route revealed itself. Against a commander whose direction could not yet be known, it was a sound answer, and it was the answer of a state that intended to go on existing. And the response reached wider than the two consuls. Rome raised new men, gathered supplies about Ariminum and in Etruria, watched the islands, kept a guard on Tarentum, and spread its weight across the whole war so that no single road could become the Republic's only problem. The numbers in the ancient record do not all agree, and the count of troops should be spoken with care. The larger truth needs no number. Rome was not asleep after Trebia. Rome was weaving a net. Hannibal answered by walking through the one part of the country the net did not cover. He crossed the Apennines and went down into the marsh country of the Arno, a way so foul that Roman planning had given it no serious weight, and the crossing was paid for in flesh. The ground was drowned, the troops unwilling, and for days men and animals waded through bog and standing water, while their commander carried in silence the knowledge that if the reports of passable ground were wrong, the marshes would be his grave and his armies. Hannibal did not slip past danger by cleverness. He walked through the middle of it because surprise was worth what it cost. Nor was the march the working of a perfect plan. It was the working of a man who never stopped asking questions of the country, of guides, of scouts, of informers, of anyone whose knowledge could turn hostile ground into a road. He did not carry a finished map of Italy in his head. He gathered one as he went, while Rome stood guard over the answers it already expected. The price of the crossing reached Hannibal's own body. The tradition tells that he lost the sight of one eye in the marshes, to exposure, to exhaustion, to the country itself. Told badly, the detail becomes a villain's mark painted on a face. Told truly, it is the measure of the campaign's cost. The commander's body was not above the march. He came out of the water changed, as his army did. And the army was managed like a single suffering body. The reconstructions, ancient and modern, set the stronger troops and the baggage where they could keep the column moving, the Celts where turning back was hardest, and the cavalry under Mago at the rear. Men slept where sleep found them. Animals became footing, shelter, or food. The last elephant, Suros, walks through this part of the story, one great beast among the wading men, and he belongs to the landscape of endurance more than to any pageant of war. The crossing was strategy, and the strategy was made of mud. The reward was position. Hannibal came out near Etruria, south of every Roman expectation, and he had done again the thing he kept doing. He had made Rome guard the likely map, while he traveled the unlikely one. Trebia had given him standing in the north. The marshes opened the south. The move also kept his war alive through a season that might have starved it. A commander deep in another people's country cannot live long on the fame of his last battle. For every pause hands Rome time to recruit, to reposition, and to think. By coming out where no Roman was looking, Hannibal made the new campaign begin with Roman knowledge already out of date. He had paid for surprise and exhaustion, and he had bought exactly the thing he needed. Flaminius would now answer a fact that had already moved past the plan built to catch it. Once in Etruria, he set the country burning. The devastation had its purposes, and they were military before they were cruel. It fed his army, it punished land that obeyed Rome, and it made visible in smoke the one promise on which his whole Italian war was built, that Rome could not protect what it claimed to command. Farms burned because armies must eat, and because smoke carries a message farther than a herald. Villages suffered because grief in the countryside becomes pressure on commanders. In a land of farmers, a wasted field was not the background of the war. It was the war speaking, and the speech was addressed to one man. Flaminius is easy to flatten into a fool, because hostile memory found a fool convenient. He was a new man, standing outside the oldest circle of senatorial families, and he had enemies. His career had been bold and unorthodox, a land law, a great road, a victory in northern Italy, and standing enough with the people to be made consul a second time. That last fact should be weighed. No Roman rose to a second consulship by being nothing but a street corner agitator against the whole governing class. Flaminius had enemies among the aristocrats, and he had the support to hold high command, and both things were true at once. The later picture, the reckless darling of the crowd set against the sober judgment of the better sort, is too clean for the machinery that actually elected him. Later tradition had every reason to make his death a moral lesson. The commander who scorned the proper forms, chased glory, ignored the warnings, and led an army to its destruction. There may be truth inside parts of that picture. There is also politics inside it, for defeat turns every old quarrel into character evidence. When a commander wins, his speed is named energy. When he loses, the same speed is named rashness, and the renaming is done by the men who survived him. Set his pursuit beside the conduct of other Roman commanders, and it looks ordinary. Scipio at the Rhone, and at Ticinus, Sempronius before Trebia, the same boldness, the same haste, because boldness and haste were what Rome bred its commanders to show. Citizens and allies expected a consul to act when enemy soldiers were burning fields. The culture that condemned Flaminius for eagerness had crowned many men for the same eagerness, whenever the day ended in victory. The judgment changed because the outcome was catastrophe and for no other reason, and Flaminius had reasons to pursue. Hannibal was wasting Etruria. The Roman army could see and hear the damage. The communities of the region looked to the consul for protection. A commander who waited too long would look like a man who had given up the countryside without a fight. Servilius and the Second Army had not yet joined him, and waiting for them would hand Hannibal movement, supplies, and the initiative. Every road open to Flaminius carried its own danger. and none of them was named safety. Hannibal understood the human arithmetic of that position. He did not need Flaminius to be a fool. He needed him angry enough, dutiful enough, and Roman enough to follow, and the burning laid that pressure exactly where political duty and military duty crossed. A consul could tell himself that pursuit was not rashness but obligation. A soldier could tell himself that the enemy fled battle out of fear. A community watching its smoke rise could ask what a Roman army was for, if not for this. Hannibal had built a trap whose bait was duty itself, waiting for Servilius sounds wise after the disaster. In the moment, it had its own price. A joined army would be safer, but the joining took time, and the time might let Hannibal slip away, and then Flaminius would have guarded a theory and lost the enemy. If instead he pursued and brought Hannibal to battle, he might end the terror before it reached deeper into Italy. That is the way the trap worked. Seen from inside the decision, the wrong road was the one that looked active, responsible, and Roman. There is one more possibility inside the pursuit, and it deserves its place. Flaminius may have meant to hold Hannibal in view until Servilius, coming from the other side, could help close the jaws. Rome remembered that kind of victory. At Telamon, 2 Roman armies had caught a Gallic host between them and crushed it utterly. If Telamon was in Flaminius' mind, then his march was no lone hunt for glory. It was a dangerous attempt to keep his grip on the enemy until the second consul could matter. That reading makes the failure sharper, not softer. A reasonable design can still walk into ruinous ground. A commander can carry political pressure, military duty, hard experience, and a sound plan of cooperation, and still fail to see the shape of the one road in front of him. Hannibal's gift was not the finding of fools. It was the arranging of a world in which the responsible choice, the ambitious choice, the patriotic choice, and the personally useful choice all pointed down the same road, and the road ended at a lake. Flaminius wanted victory, and victory would have silenced every enemy he had in Rome. It would have proved that the new man, the outsider, was the man who stopped Hannibal. That wish did not make him foolish. It made him exactly the man for whom the lure had been made. So the army followed the Carthaginian trail toward Lake Trasimene. Hannibal had baited the hook with movement, with damage, and with visibility. It remained only for the road itself to close. The trap at Trasimene was built upon one plain observation. A marching column is not a battle line. An army on a road has length before it has width. Its front may stand far from its rear, and its men do not all arrive at the same fight at the same hour. If the ground refuses room, the column cannot unfold into the formation it was trained to become. If fog shortens sight, each part of the army learns of the battle later than it needs to. Out of these simple truths, and nothing more mysterious, Hannibal built the morning. His campfires at the far end of the lake spoke of distance and direction, and the Romans believed what the fires told them. In the night he set his troops along the hills and beside the road, with the lake for one wall and the slopes for the other. None of it asked for prophecy. It asked for a commander who knew to the hour how a pursuing army moves at first light. Even here, the ground itself asks for honesty. The shoreline has shifted in the long ages since, the exact field is still argued over, and the grave pits cannot be made to carry more certainty than they hold. A careful reconstruction can lay the danger along the northern shore and show lake, slopes, road, and hidden men pressing together upon one column. It cannot pin every unit to the land, and it should not pretend to. Trasimene was a battlefield, not a diagram, and the evidence will not let it become one. The mist made the design crueler still. The fog of Trasimene is no decoration in the sources. It was the very stuff of what the soldiers could and could not know. A Roman in the column heard shouting, hooves, iron, and impact before he could understand the shape of any of it. Orders broke apart in the air that was meant to carry them. A man fought the enemy nearest his own body, not knowing whether the army around him was forming, advancing, retreating, or dying. The front of the column pressed on into the road while the rear was struck, and the flanks were assailed from above and beside. What should have become a battle line remained a trapped procession, men turning and forming and fighting on ground that refused them the room to become an army. The lake shore offered no mercy. And the hills released no one, the hills released only Hannibal's men. That is why Trasimene was not Trebia told over again. At Trebia, the Romans at least reached a field and formed a line and fought in their order under miserable heaven. At Trasimene, formation itself was the thing attacked. The army entered as a marching body and learned under the blades that the ground would never permit it to become a fighting body at all. Hannibal had moved the moment of decision earlier once again. The question was no longer how the Roman line would fare. The question was whether a Roman line could exist. Flaminius was killed in the fighting he had chosen to risk, and the accounts give the moment a shape. Livy names an avenger, the Gallic horseman Ducarius, who knew the consul's face from the wars in the north. The larger fact outweighs the name. The consul died with the army he had led, and panic went outward from his death like rings from a stone. Some men fought toward the hills. Some went into the lake, where the water did not save them from the cavalry that rode in after them. One body of Romans broke clean through the trap and surrendered later when escape had turned into isolation. The numbers should stay rounded, for the ancient counts will not settle into one table, and a false precision would dishonor the dead it claims to count. The safe shape is catastrophe: thousands killed, thousands taken, a consul dead, and a second consular army struck from the war. Rome needed no exact ledger to understand what had been done to it. Hannibal then turned the prisoners into policy, as he had before. Romans could be chained and held. Latin and allied prisoners could be released and sent home, carrying the message that the quarrel was with Rome, not with every Italian people bound to Rome by oath. The policy did not break the alliance. It pressed patiently on the seam Hannibal needed to open. Rome's strength was the strength of many peoples. If those peoples could be parted from Rome in their hearts before they were parted on the field, then every victory would do the work of two. He searched, too, for the body of Flaminius, and the detail is worth its place, for it complicates the flat brutality of the day. Hannibal had destroyed a Roman army, and still the dead consul belonged to an order of things: public command, the honor owed an enemy memory. The search undid nothing of the slaughter. It showed a commander who understood the theater of respect as deeply as the theater of terror, and used both. The field itself yielded a harvest. Carthaginian soldiers stripped the Roman dead of weapons and armor, and that gear had a future. At Cannae, in the year following, Hannibal's African infantry would stand looking almost Roman across the dust, because Trasimene had clothed them in Roman war gear. The next disaster would wear pieces of this one on its body, and the immediate Roman ruin ran wider than one army. Servilius, the second consul, was already marching to join Flaminius, not knowing that there was no one left to join, and the cavalry he sent ahead was destroyed in its turn. From Rome, the pattern now looked like something out of an evil dream. Hannibal had crossed the Alps, broken Sempronius at Trebia, walked through country Rome called impassable, and destroyed Flaminius at Trasimene. The danger was no longer a lost battle. It was a commander who made every Roman answer arrive in the wrong shape, at the wrong hour, on the wrong ground. Which leaves the question that the victory itself set down. If Rome had lost another army and another consul, why did Hannibal not march on the city? No council minutes survive to answer. The route in the sources runs through Picenum toward the Adriatic, into rich country where a worn army could take plunder and rest after the marshes and the killing. The tale of a repulse at Spoltium may keep the memory of a real test of Latin walls, but it should not be made to carry the whole answer. Hannibal had to weigh supply, recovery, the sea road to Carthage, and the keeping of his army as a living instrument rather than spending it against the walls of Rome. On the Adriatic shore his men could heal, his horses could be treated, his ranks could take in the captured arms, and word could go home across the water. Turning away from Rome was not weakness of nerve. It may have been the knowledge that a terrifying battle and the machinery of final victory are not the same thing, and that he possessed the one and not the other. In Rome, the shock ran through the temples as surely as through the treasury, for a Roman disaster was never only a count of the dead. It raised questions of command, of omens, of rights neglected, and gods grown angry, of whether the state still stood right with heaven. The dead consul could be judged, the living city could perform its rites, and the Senate could search for a form of command that did not simply repeat the failure. Trasimene opened a void in leadership and a crisis in method at the same hour. Rome did not surrender after Trasimene. Rome changed the question. The answer was a man, and the man was Quintus Fabius Maximus, whom Rome would one day call the delayer, first in mockery and afterward in gratitude. But before Fabius became a strategy, he became an answer to panic. The news from Trasimene did not enter Rome as a clean dispatch. Livy's picture is civic before it is military. Women waiting at the gates for sons, husbands, brothers, and fathers. The Senate sitting from sunrise to sunset. Rumor running quicker than knowledge through streets that had sent their men north. Then came word that Servilius' cavalry too was destroyed. The second consul lived, and yet the ordinary frame of command looked broken. The war was no longer a matter of the frontiers. It had come inside the walls, and it sat down in every house. So Rome appointed a dictator, because ordinary command had now failed twice running. The word did not mean then what it means now. The dictatorship was an emergency office of the old republic, bounded by custom and by time, and it gathered authority into one man at the hour when divided command had itself become the enemy. After Trasimene, the gathering made sense. Rome needed a commander who could act without repeating the consular rhythm that Hannibal had learned to play like an instrument. Fabius took the office, and Minucius was named master of horse beside him. And the first thing Fabius repaired was not the army. He began by making the city legible to itself again. The Sibylline books were consulted, vows were made, games were promised. Venus Uracina entered the program of repair, a goddess with Sicilian and Carthaginian shadows about her, and beside her men's good sense itself, given an altar in a city that had lately lost its own. There was public prayer, there were couches spread for the gods, and there was the vow of a sacred spring. To modern eyes, it can look like ornament about the real business of war. In Rome, it was the real business, the means by which a broken public mind was set back into working order, fear turned into acts that could be performed together in daylight by everyone. Only after that civic repair does the military Fabius come into focus. He turned to walls, garrisons, bridges, armies, roads, and supplies, the plain geometry of survival. He did not tell Rome to be calm. He built the conditions in which calm could accomplish something. His answer to Hannibal had no glory in it anywhere. He refused to fight. When Hannibal offered the field, Fabius kept the high ground and declined the gift. He shadowed the Carthaginian army, watched its movements, marched by roads his scouts had walked, kept his men screened from the enemy cavalry, struck at forages where striking was cheap, and would not give the open battle on which all of Hannibal's hopes were built. He ordered the people of the threatened districts to carry their food and drive their beasts into the walled towns, and to destroy what could not be moved, a harsh command, which kept supplies from Hannibal by taking them first from everyone. It told Rome's allies that protection might now mean watching their own fields made barren before the enemy could touch them. The policy was strategy, and it tasted of humiliation. For Roman military culture held battle to be the visible proof of command. Allies expected protection, soldiers expected to fight, and landowners expected the army to defend the land, not to order it emptied. Fabius could be right in the science of war and hated in the houses of Italy at the same time, and he was. A countryside can burn for sound strategic reasons. It burns all the same. Nor was Fabius idle while he refused, though his enemies made delay sound like a sleep. He moved, watched, chose his ground, punished foraging parties, and labored to make the invader's life harder without ever offering him a third consular army to destroy. The work was smaller than battle and far less glorious in the telling, but it was work, and it slowly changed the nature of the war from spectacle into pressure. The logic was sound, and it was old wisdom besides. Fight when the conditions give a fair chance, refuse when they do not, build your strength, waste the enemies, and let time itself bear arms against the invader. The careful commanders of the Greek East would have known every word of it, but later Roman memory polished the man into a monument. The delayer became a savior figure, and the famous verse about one man restoring the state by delaying made the policy sound cleaner than it can ever have felt in the burning summer of 217 BC. The anger against delay had a voice, and the voice was Minucius. Minucius was no fool set beside a sage. He spoke for an argument that half of Rome wanted spoken. Hannibal was burning allied land, while the dictator watched from the heights. Soldiers bred to win honor in battle stood looking down while the enemy walked at ease below them. In Rome, they mocked Fabius as Hannibal's keeper, his nurse, his attendant, as though the dictator's office existed to follow a Carthaginian about Italy. Fabius answered that to abandon a sound plan for the sake of sneers would be cowardice. The answer was true, and the sneers went on working on other men. Hannibal understood the politics of that frustration, and he fed it with a craftsman's care. He ravaged, he offered battle, he moved away, and every performance painted Fabius more passive than the last. He went so far as to spare Fabius' own estates while burning all around them, planting the suspicion that the dictator kept some private understanding with the enemy. Whether any man wholly believed the slander mattered less than the wound it opened. Delay could be made to wear the face of cowardice, of class interest, of treason. Fabius' reply to suspicion was stubbornly public. When Rome refused to pay for an exchange of prisoners, the tradition has him selling his own land to meet the obligation himself. The detail has earned its long survival, for it shows what his authority cost him to hold. He could command the armies of the Republic, and at the same hour he had to defend the very meaning of his restraint against rumor, mockery, and the old Roman certainty that a commander's duty is to seek the decisive day. Through all of it, he kept refusing the bait. He did not always look wise in the refusing. Hannibal's trick with the cattle and the torches walked the Carthaginian army out of a sealed valley in the night, oxen with fire on their horns drawing the Roman pickets uphill while the army went by below, and Fabius woke to find himself outwitted once more. The episode should be kept, because it keeps Fabius mortal. Delay was no enchanted shield. It was a discipline, and a discipline can hold firm and still look foolish while the enemy walks away laughing in the dark. Then Minucius was given his moment. A limited success against Hannibal's forces swelled in the telling, because Rome hungered for action so badly that a half victory could be served as proof of a better way. Political pressure raised Minucius until his authority stood equal to the dictator's own, and that was more than an insult to one man. It wrote the city's quarrel into the structure of command itself. One half of the army would wait, and the other half would seek to win. The split handed Hannibal his opening, and he took it. Minucius, now his own master, was drawn forward and led into a trap, and it was Fabius, watching from his own ground, who marched down to save the very man whose rise had been aimed against him. The tradition has Minucius hail Fabius afterward as father, and return, in effect, to obedience. Memory has polished the scene, but the fact beneath the polish bears the weight. Fabian delay had to defeat more than Numidian cavalry. It had to outlast Roman impatience long enough to prove that impatience could kill. The deeper change was wrought in Roman thought. Fabius forced Rome to admit that Hannibal's chosen battle was not an obligation, that an army of the Republic did not owe an answer to every challenge, every fire, every taunt, every march through allied land. Rome could make Hannibal live inside Italy's distances. Rome could make him forage, bargain, threaten, and wander, and never grant him the decisive field his whole war required. The change was bought at a price, for it asked Romans to unlearn the oldest lesson they knew, that courage and attack are one thing. It asked allies to believe that protection could wear the face of evacuation. It asked soldiers to accept that discipline meant holding the high ground while the smoke of other men's farms rose from the valleys below. The method pressed upon everything Hannibal needed, and it pressed no less hard upon Rome's picture of itself. That is why the backlash mattered. The delayer was not merely cautious. He was asking the Republic to endure a defeat of its pride, year upon year, so that it need not endure a defeat of its armies. What delay bought was time, and Rome spent the time learning. Fabius could not unmake Trebia or Trasimene, but he could keep the next Roman army from becoming the next lesson in Hannibal's school. Time meant recruits at drill, allies steadied, food held behind walls, commanders studying the shape of their enemy, and a senate recovering its nerve without pretending that the last two battles had been accidents of weather. It was an unlovely kind of strength. It was strength, all the same, and it outlasted beauty. The trouble was that Rome hated the lesson nearly as much as it needed it. Trasimene had made delay necessary, and Fabius made delay visible, and Minucius showed how heavy that visibility was to bear. One question now stood over the Republic like the fog over the lake road: whether Rome could endure the method long enough for the method to work, or whether Roman anger would drag the armies back toward the one kind of battle Hannibal had been asking for all along.